Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
I think that sometimes we view engagement as a characteristic of an employee, and we don't think enough about the conditions that we have our employees in. And when we label an employee as disengaged or not engaged or whatever the label might be, we're putting that onus on them. And in reality, a lot of times they may be feeling that way because of their day-to-day experience. And again, this isn't the same thing as happiness or satisfaction. It is things like, do I have the information I need to do my job well? Do I understand how my job connects to the success of the organization? Do I feel valued?
Let's be honest, HR doesn't have a data problem. It has a what do we actually do with this problem? Quantum Workplace helps leaders unlock talent insights that are often siloed, connecting engagement, performance, and development into a single clear view of your workforce. Because clarity leads to better decisions and better teams. Visit quantumworkplace.com to learn more. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast ever. I'm Hiba, your host and resident hater, and today I'm bringing some fire. Real talk, we have all been here. You send your CEO an engagement score. They look at it, they nod, they say something completely wrong potentially about what it means. And you sit there dying inside thinking that this is not actually what the number says at all. Been there? Because same. And that moment is exactly why today's episode exists. I am obsessed with data, like genuinely, I geek out over it. I've also spent years watching HR leaders, myself included, hand over a number and let it do the talking. And oftentimes that number, it lies. There's context to everything, nuance to everything. That's what we say about this role of HR. And the number lies not because the data is bad, but because the questions we're asking potentially could be outdated. We're measuring engagement the same way we did a decade ago, and then kind of acting confused when the results don't match exactly what we're seeing. And work is progressing faster than it ever has before. So I'm really excited for today's episode. And my guest has spent nearly 20 years working alongside HR teams, sitting in executive rooms, and watching what happens when the data lands. She leads the insights team at Quantum Workplace, which means she's had a front row seat to how organizations interpret and misinterpret what their people data is actually telling them. We're talking about new ways to think about engagement, new questions to bring your executive team, and why disengaged people on your team might not be exactly who you think they are. Anne Maltese, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I got really corny with that intro, like really intense, but it's like a scenario I've seen play out so many times where I hand over a number and then somebody concocts a whole story in their head about what the number means. And then I have to explain that's not actually what's going on here.
Well, it becomes reality. And then you are trying to rewrite reality to what it actually is. So it is such an important topic. And yeah, I feel like this is going to be very cathartic.
Yeah, I'm gonna unleash my demons. Let go of my demons. What a wild thing to say. Let's do it. Okay. But before we do get to the questions, I've been asking every guest this season, mostly because I'm a curious nerd, what is something new you want to learn this year?
That is a great question. And I know you've heard this from multiple people that get intimidated by this question because we all want to sound interesting and cool. For me, I want to learn history. So I am the youngest child, and sometimes I won't blanket statement this for every youngest child, but I feel like the world exists once we entered it. And so I want to learn more about my family and some ancestry while I have the ability to, while I still have family that's here to tell those stories. So that is something that I want to really be intentional about, get those stories flowing when I'm talking to family.
I love that I'm also a youngest child, so I get it. And my siblings are much older than me, so they have context of existing before me too. So I'm like, it's almost interesting to hear their take on like what kind of parenting my parents did, because I came about in like a very different time than them.
Yes. We talk a lot about how I didn't have a curfew when I was in high school. Like it gets a little bit more lax, I think, when you were the youngest child. But life existed before I was here. Tell me more.
I'm always like, my mom decided the other three turned out fine. So like, she didn't care about me. Like,
Yeah.
not that she didn't care, but like I didn't have a set bedtime. So I'd had to like be in bed in my room at a certain time. But then I would just read my books until whenever I
Yeah.
wanted, whenever I
Yeah.
fell asleep. And she never really strictly enforced a bedtime.
Yeah, I had something similar. I feel like downside is there's very few pictures of me as a child because I feel like they were like, well, we took pictures of the other two.
Same. No, I just had to text my sister yesterday and be like, do you have any baby pics of me? And she was like, why are you asking me? And I'm like, because I don't have them. So like, I need to know if
Yeah.
you have them. It is a very interesting dynamic. I did this thing recently, maybe it was like 4 or 5 months ago, where I took my phone over to my mom and I had her cook my favorite meal. And I just stuck the phone up and recorded the whole thing. So
Oh,
it's
that's
like
awesome.
a 40-minute video of my mom explaining to me intensely about how she makes this dish. And I'm honestly like, this is so morbid, but I'm like, someday she will not be here and
Yeah.
I will want to watch those videos and
Yeah.
like remember how hard I used to like what her laughter sounds like how she would give
Exactly.
instructions. So I highly recommend it to anybody. Sometimes I just take my phone over and I ask my mom to like tell me a story from when she was growing up and I'll just like hit record on my phone so I could keep a record of like, the things that she went through and like how she
Yeah.
experienced life.
Yeah. Learn it while you can.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. I keep telling my sister, like, we should have a podcast where mom tells stories and like we talk about them. And she's like, you already have a podcast. You don't need to do more. Maybe someday we'll do an episode. We'll see. We'll see. Okay. But getting into our episode for today, you've spent close to 20 years working with HR teams on their people data. What is the biggest shift you've seen in how organizations think about engagement? And do you think we've actually kept up with the shift?
Yeah. So my team spends a lot of time talking about the past couple of years because in my career, that's where I think we've seen the biggest shifts. Kind of this pendulum swinging from engagement. So if we think about the Great Resignation, we were hyper focused on attracting and retaining talents. And then the pendulum kind of swings back over to performance. And we think about how performance and productivity matter most. And I do feel like more recently, organizations are embracing they're one and the same, or they both matter. They're not competing priorities. And so that's kind of refreshing. Not every organization is there yet. But I think some are realizing that. But I think even beyond that, a lot of organizations are thinking about engagement as future readiness. How are our top performers doing? Are we retaining them for the future? Are people growing? AI is changing roles. It will change roles. It will continue to do that. How are we developing skills to keep up with that? And so I think when we're thinking about it as a future readiness endeavor, it's a lot smarter way and kind of goes beyond thinking about it as just a retention mechanism or just a performance mechanism. And so I've been kind of inspired to see that shift.
I was writing notes while you were talking because that has been like a big trend I have seen where everyone keeps asking like, how do I know if my employees are like ready for what the future looks like? And how do I know that they're curious enough to explore these tools and embrace them and change their workflows? And I'm like, engagement doesn't really measure that. It could tell you a piece of it. Performance also kind of tells you a piece of that. So I love that you're talking about that it becomes more of like how is your organization ready for the future?
Yeah.
We're like it was struggling as an HR team in general. I think HR as an industry is like really struggling in general with trying to figure out how do we realize what's going on in the moment because so much of the data we collect almost feels outdated by the time we've actually had a chance to digest it,
Yeah. Yeah. And being smart and intentional about that. And I mean, it's also hard because we don't exactly know what the future is going to look like, what it is going to require.
Yeah.
We're having to build the path for something that is a little bit uncertain. But I think organizations and HR teams that are focused on that are still going to be far ahead than those that aren't.
Agreed. Something I cannot escape is like engagement. Engagement scores are like everywhere right now. I feel like you could Google engagement and you could figure something out. But the headline for the last few years, and rightfully so, by the way, seems to be engagement is down. Do you buy it, or do you think we're measuring the wrong things and calling it a crisis? Like,
yeah, it is all about how you're measuring it and what that metric is going to report. So what I tend to see in the news the most is a company that uses a very specific survey to measure engagement. It's a short survey. It's intentionally designed to measure what's in control of managers. And I do think that that is reporting something very valuable. I'm of the opinion, though, that it's not necessarily engagement. It's really reporting on manager enablement and manager health, because we are focused in that survey on what's in control of managers. And so at Quantum Workplace, we do use a different measure of engagement. We are asking questions like, do you recommend the organization as a great place to work? It would take a lot to get me to leave here, et cetera. Kind of more of those traditional outcomes of engagement. We've actually seen more steadiness in engagement in recent years. But what does align with that other company is that we do see managers struggling.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising to me, but I think that that should be more of the headline than engagement being down.
Yeah.
Are our managers, with how hard that role is right now, and I think as HR, we can empathize also being in a hard role. Are managers equipped? Are they able to keep up with all of the changes happening? Are we giving them enough training information? Are we giving them kind of time to process in a world that moves so quickly? So I think that's the headline.
Yeah, I have maybe this will be like the first time people are hearing about this, but I'm working on a survey about the biggest challenges HR is going to face in 2026. I'm actually not sure how much I'm allowed to say, but maybe I'll say this, that one of the biggest challenges flagged was manager effectiveness. And I was surprised. Like, I know it's an issue and I write about it so frequently. In fact, the standing joke I have made is I'm just a girl standing in front of corporate America asking it to train its managers. But the reality is, like, the manager crisis piece you're bringing up is so true. And I just read this article that Facebook was saying that at some point they want to trim, or Meta was saying they want to trim so many employees as to have a manager ratio of 50-1. And I was like, in what reality? We're already struggling. So I think it's just going to be an interesting time to watch work. Everyone's probably getting sick of me saying that every episode, but I don't know what else to say because I'm like, everything is changing so rapidly. We are on the front lines of seeing and feeling these things. Now, what does that mean for all of us as we're also trying to like talk to our employees, our managers, our executives about a lot of this stuff, because that headline is so salacious. Like engagement is down. So everyone's like, yeah, nobody's happy at work. And I'm like, whoa, wait. And I love that you're saying that when you all measure it, you're seeing it's actually holding really steady. But when someone is sitting in an executive presentation and someone asks, like, is our engagement healthy? What is your reaction to that question?
Well, my first reaction is, thank goodness someone's asking questions because at least they're engaging in the presentation. But yes. I think sometimes though, especially if that's asked early on in the presentation, it is kind of an executive measure of, is this a concern or not? Do I need to pay attention to the rest of the presentation? They're kind of just wanting that gut check of, okay, if things are healthy, then this is a non-issue. We don't have to put action here. So maybe a little cynical from some of my presentations I've sat in, but I think it is a common question. And it's good to be thinking about the health, but to your point, it's nuanced. It's not telling you everything. It's like going to a doctor and saying, well, am I healthy? It's like, well, how do you want me to approach that answer? Is that physical health? Is that mental health? Is that diet? There's so much to it. And so as much as we want the easy button answer, that overall quote unquote score is not going to tell you that answer.
Yeah. And it's just like, engagement is so interesting because it's the measure that I think gets talked about the most too. So it's the most commonly understood one, right? Is what I feel like. People are like, I understand engagement, but like you were saying at the doctor, like healthy and engagement, it's so much more than just like an answer. And that nuance is important because like overall as an organization, maybe your organization is very engaged, but then when you go down to the team level, you actually see there are a lot of teams that are disengaged or struggling with like the current situation. And you mentioned something that I honestly couldn't stop thinking about after we talked about it the first time. This idea that the disengaged employees aren't always the people trying to burn things down on their way out. Like, tell me more about that. And like, what are you actually seeing in the data?
I think that sometimes we view engagement as a characteristic of an employee. And we don't think enough about the conditions that we have our employees in. And when we label an employee as disengaged or not engaged or whatever the label might be, we're putting that onus on them. And in reality, a lot of times they may be feeling that way because of their day-to-day experience. And again, this isn't the same thing as happiness or satisfaction. It is things like, do I have the information I need to do my job well? Do I understand how my job connects to the success of the organization? Do I feel valued? Where I've seen this play out is when you are able to connect kind of engagement to some sort of business metric. So I was working with an organization not too long ago where they were able to plug in like a productivity metric into their employee engagement analytics, which is a really smart thing to do, by the way. But what they saw was there was a department that had the lowest productivity scores. They were also one of the least engaged groups. And so I think as humans, sometimes where our mind goes is what's wrong with that group? That group needs to go. But in reality, when you start to dig into the employee feedback behind that overall number, they didn't have a specific tool they needed to be productive. And they were frustrated by that. And they kept saying, we don't have what we need. And that is not on the employees. That's on the conditions that they're in. And so I think that that is just an incredibly important mindset to have, is that when we label people, sometimes we make it the people's issue. And that's not really how we should be thinking about this.
Yeah, it's like when a manager comes to me and is like, so and so isn't performing. And I think they're not a high performer. And I'm always like, oh, you think they're not a high performer? I'm like, what context have you given them about their job? Are you delegating tasks effectively? Are you setting the expectation of what you expect high performance to be? And the answer is like 99% of the time, not to be dramatic, no, the manager isn't doing those things. So whenever I see these things where people are like, everyone's disengaged or I'm like, come on, the story. Like I said at the very beginning, the nuance, the story is so much deeper than just this one measurement or a number that's telling you such a small part of the story.
Right. When we hear that kind of doomsday stat, we think of these millions of people that are toxic. And that's not really the case.
Could you imagine?
Right. But yeah, I think we've got to peel back the onion, and we really have to understand kind of what it is that, how does the workplace feel today? Are people in the conditions that they need to be successful at work?
I feel like the answer is no, but I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'm going to speak for everyone. What do you think are some smarter questions HR leaders should be walking into that exec room with instead of just, the standard engagement score?
Yeah. Well, we were speaking to this, but I think one of them is, are our managers well positioned to lead performing teams? And really making sure it's not just how their teams are doing, but how the managers themselves are doing. So an interesting trend we've been seeing come through in a lot of our customers' data in the past year is when we kind of look at the different like stair step, as I call it, different levels in the organization, our executives, directors, managers, individual contributors, we really see engagement start to break down at the director level. And my hypothesis is that, we're close enough to the leaders, but we're not always in maybe those leadership conversations. We don't always have the context. We don't always maybe get the coaching we need because we are a higher level at a director level. And that really cascades down. So I think painting that story and then what that means when managers aren't well positioned to have their teams perform. But I also think another smart question in that conversation is, how are our top performers doing? And again, not thinking about it from an overall organization level, but those key populations.
Yeah, like really at the team level too at times, and most important. It's so interesting. Like I feel like I ask a lot of questions. It's probably a good job that I have a podcast because I can ask all my questions. But like sometimes I get caught up in like the spiral of looking at the data and having those like million questions and not knowing what to do with it. And so this just is helpful food for thought as I'm thinking through like when we run if we run an engagement survey. We did a lot of pulse surveys last year. I'm still trying to figure out like what's the right cadence, what's the right question. So like maybe I'll get some more inspo by the end of this and then I can pitch you my idea and you tell me if it
Yeah.
works or not. There's one thing though that you said earlier, and I have been harping on this as well in the newsletter, is this idea that we like talk about engagement and then we talk about performance and they are separate. Like you run an engagement survey, you do a performance review, and the dots are never connected. Like,
Yeah.
why is that a problem? And what does it look like when we do connect the two? Like you touched on it lightly, but I want to go deeper.
Yeah. It's a problem because we're missing the insights of a population that should get a lot of our attention and a lot of our investment in top performers, that is.
Yeah.
And so I think you do need to connect those dots. And so sometimes it's a matter, in a lot of engagement surveys in quantum workplaces, engagement analytics, you can slice and filter your data in different ways by different demographics.
Dream.
We automatically do that for performance reviews or other things that you may be doing in our software. So it's an automatic view for us. And we need to know what is the experience like for our top performers, because a lot of times they do feel like they're getting development, and that's a good thing, but they don't feel like the experience is perfect. And so common trends that we see in a lot of our organizations we partner with is they feel frustrated when low performance is tolerated around them. So they hopefully know that they're a top performer, but if we don't really have a culture of accountability, I think nothing frustrates somebody that is kind of like crushing it than seeing that that's tolerated when others aren't doing that. But also being able to see, like, are they a retention risk? Are they feeling like they're growing into the future? All of those things really, again, kind of position engagement to that future readiness of the organization versus just kind of a static snapshot of how we're doing as an organization right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting because so many people, like their biggest fear is like my top performer leaves.
Yeah.
Like my biggest fear is like the top performer leaves. And I'm like, okay, so like, what are you doing to stop that? Well, I'm checking in with them. And I'm like, well, like, do we have data that that's even what the thing is? Like, do we even know that they could leave? Like maybe they are frustrated by other things. Maybe there are other things they want to express and when we don't connect that engagement to performance dot, I just think it's a lot of he said, she said, which is probably one of my most annoying things about HR is when people's like, well, I heard somebody said this, or I did a one-on-one with them and they said this. And then I go talk to them as the HR person and I hear a completely different talk track. And I'm like, I cannot. That's why I like kind of love data because at least the person, if they trust you and they're doing the survey, they're at least submitting their thoughts in a way that doesn't feel as personal as like telling you to your face. Like if you were my manager, like, Anne, you're disappointing me. You're not a good manager.
Right. And there's just so much signal in all of that data. Another piece that we see is usually the group that's just below your top performers, where they have a lot of opportunity, or where they tell us there's opportunity when they respond to engagement surveys, is having clear expectations. And so it's not that they're necessarily underperforming. It's like, can someone re-clarify what this looks like, what I should be doing? And so again, that's not necessarily on them fully. Yes, you should be asking for clarity if you don't have it. But I think when we see an entire population of people signaling, hey, I'm not quite sure I know what excellent work looks like, that's a fairly simple action to take of how do we clarify that so more people can potentially do great work.
My favorite story that I told recently, I was like doing a video interview with a company and I told the story. So I'm going to tell it again on the podcast. Is I had a hiring or a manager be like, I just don't think this person's like performing well. And I was like, okay, like, did you set expectations with them? And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, at the beginning of the week, are you talking about what you expect them to do throughout the week? Like what you want them to accomplish, like what good looks like. And the manager was like, well, I just feel like that's a lot of hand holding and I shouldn't have to do that. And I was like, okay, to be clear, I do that every week with my direct report. And I say, here are the things we're trying to get done this week. Here's
Yeah.
what would be great if we could get done. If we have to bump it, here's what we could bump. But like, I'm always clear about what I expect from you because that is how you get like
Yeah.
high quality, well done work. And then she said to me, and I still laugh about this to this day, like, isn't that a little boomery, like setting
Whoa.
expectations like that? And I was like,
No.
nobody like just comes out knowing what's expected of them, right? And especially at work where there's so much gray area and everything done. As a good manager, the one thing that anyone can do is every week. I mean, like maybe you get to the point where you don't need
Yeah.
to do it week over week. I don't
Yeah.
do it week over week some weeks because my direct report knows like we have these targets we're trying to hit by the end of March. But if things start to go sideways, I know I can intervene because she knows that I am holding this expectation. And if she's not
Yeah.
accomplishing it, she knows I'm going to intervene. But I thought it was such an interesting take that this is like a younger manager who was like, that feels like a little bit too much to talk about what's expected of the employee.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is the core function of management.
Right. Yeah. You know, what's interesting as I hear you say that is we have a few survey questions that use the word coach in them.
Mm,
Like my immediate manager effectively coaches my performance. And there are some organizations, not as many as there used to be, that were like, oh, well, that means coach is a bad thing. And we're like, no,
what?
coach is actually a good thing. Like
Yeah.
a manager should be coaching. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are only targeting our people that need to improve poor performance to
Mm,
be better performance, but everyone should get coaching. And I think when you start to equate it to sports, which, you know, sometimes that analogy resonates with some people and
does
sometimes
with me.
you lose them.
Does with
But
me.
it's like every professional team, sports team has a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And if these folks are professionals, they're theoretically very good at what they do, but the team still benefits from somebody coaching their direction and their development and their growth. And then I think it kind of disarms people when they hear that word a little bit.
Yeah. Like coaches, I don't know. Like that, I grew up playing sports, so I very much love the sports analogy. And that is how I approach like me and my job and my craft. My best friend and I used to joke like during the pandemic, we lived together. And it was honestly amazing to live with your best friend during a pandemic because
Sounds like it.
we were each other's pod and we were having a great
Yeah.
time. Okay. Well, she's an artist in a different way. And it's so interesting because we would watch sports documentaries and all of our friends would be like, why are the two of you watching like so many sports documentaries? And we'd be like, well, like, first of all, I played basketball, so I love any sports documentaries about basketball. But we both ended up saying like athletes and coaches felt like the people who cared about their craft in the same way we care about our
Yeah.
craft. And it feels like kind of corny to be like, I care about my HR craft, but like I do. I care
Yeah.
about being a good manager. I care about being a good coach. And I think like if that's the case, then we can coach and guide people
Yeah.
and give them really effective feedback so that performance is always tied with that engagement.
Yes. I think that's such an important point. We want managers ideally to care about people as people. But we also, or I should say, and we also want them to care about performance, care about development. And so, yeah, I think something as simple as clarifying expectations is showing that you care how someone
Not
is able to
boomery.
perform. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Most HR tools give you dashboards full of data, but not a lot of direction. Quantum Workplace helps HR and people leaders connect the dots between engagement, performance, and development, so insights don't live in silos and decisions aren't made in the dark. The outcome? More confident leaders, stronger connections, and high-performing teams that support real business results, not just reports that sit untouched. If you're ready to move from collecting data to leading with it, check out Quantum Workplace at quantumworkplace.com. The thing that I think is interesting is I feel like there's this fallacy, maybe that's the right word. I've been butchering my words lately, but I feel like there's a fallacy where people think top performers are also super engaged. Is fallacy the right word there? But if somebody is a top performer and they're disengaged, what do you think that signals?
Yeah. Well, so if we think about disengagement at the far end of the spectrum, I think that that is probably rare, but we do see top performers not being like fully engaged,
Mm.
where all, you know, they're willing to advocate, they're willing to stay, all of those things that kind of define engagement. And it does signal really helpful things for that organization because again, it's thinking about how are we retaining these top performers? How are we allowing them to grow? How are we making them feel part of the future? And so oftentimes, what we'll see in comments is that they want more information. Top performers are hungry for context because that helps them perform better. They will sometimes talk about pay and
Naturally.
but I think the lovely thing, maybe lovely is a weird word to use there, about connecting those dots between engagement and performance is it stops the assumptions, especially in that executive presentation. Because if we see comments about pay, the guard immediately comes up among executives. They become defensive. Everybody wants more pay. Everyone's going to complain about pay. These are our disengaged people. And when we're able to show something like, actually, it's your very best people, and they're just giving you some constructive feedback or some ideas, it does, again, kind of disarm that data because we realize who it's coming from and we realize that we should and need to care about that feedback. So, yeah, I think the more that we can kind of dig into those connections between what are, the different levels of performance saying, it really kind of changes the conversation at that executive level, especially.
Yeah, I'm like just nerding out so hard. My brain is going in a million directions because I have so many more questions for you.
Yeah.
Again, I guess it's a good thing I have a podcast to
Yeah.
ask all my questions.
I
She
could
gets
talk
to
about
ask them,
this. I mean, we could have a whole retreat.
We could have a whole, I could probably do like 8 hours straight on this because there's
Yes.
so much that I also just think leaders instinctively think they know about like engagement and performance. And then they like start talking and I'm like, you don't actually know anything. You don't understand how these two are connected. And it drives me nuts. So we'll get to the bottom of all that today. But the other thing that I think a lot about, okay, so when someone is like a top performer, I always like to like think about their flight risk. I'm like, ooh, could they be a flight risk? Like if a top performer leaves, like how messed up could our business get? But succession planning and engagement often feel like they live in like totally separate worlds. Like I'll say something like, ooh, they're disengaged. Maybe they're a flight risk, but I don't often then go do their succession plan either.
Yeah.
So like, should they live in separate worlds?
Yes. I fundamentally believe all of these things need to connect. And that is what makes engagement go from kind of a metric to more of kind of that business, business metric, if you will. And so with succession, what's, the number one thing I'm going to probably look at first is, are they a retention risk? What are they signaling? Because we have them lined up for this position that we hope they grow into. And what is the likelihood of them leaving? If they're high risk, we need to be doing something about that and understanding why they're high risk. But the other reason that I think that those need to connect is then thinking more about how engagement influences who is in our candidate pipeline. Do they have experience leading engaged teams? If I have a succession candidate and maybe they just don't have even a large team, they've never had to do this before, or maybe I see evidence that there's maybe some rockiness in that engagement feedback. How am I developing them? So I'm not just naming successors and hoping it works out, but how am I being very intentional about the development they need to be ready for that position? So I think it's both ways that those need to connect, not just what their feedback looks like, but what the engagement of their teams or their downline looks like. That should inform their development and readiness.
Yeah, it's like the analogy I use a lot, and you kind of said it at the beginning, is like, I think HR is like the doctor of an organization.
Yes.
Because oftentimes all of these things are symptoms that are somehow connected, right? Like my fluid retention might be connected to my high blood pressure, which might be connected to something else. I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. Just thought I would say that. But it's like all interconnected. It's probably why I like love Grey's Anatomy so much. And I could spiral for hours on like WebMD. It's a bad habit. I don't like doing it, but it's like so interesting to me about how it's all connected and they're all symptoms of other things. So when you're thinking about like disengagement and engagement, or even performance high or low, and then like succession planning as an outcome of all of this and like where it affects the downline, I think it's so interesting to think of our jobs as like doctors, or maybe like investigators if you're feeling fun.
Yeah.
Because it's all connected.
How does it all connect? I know. I love and hate like when you go to the doctor and you get your blood drawn and then,
Yep.
it goes online and you get 85 different metrics about all of the things in your blood. And you're like, but what? Some of this is in range. Some of this is out of range.
Yeah. What does this mean?
Yeah. And it's always interesting because I've, I guess been fortunate. My doctor always just responds back, looks great. I'm like, well,
well,
but how does all of this connect? And like, what does this all mean? So yeah, I think it's really important because all of those metrics individually do have value, but where they become the most valuable is when you're starting to kind of connect them, and it simplifies things too, where you don't have 85 metrics, you have maybe like 7 really good metrics that are aggregates of different views.
So the engagement survey is your blood work, and cholesterol is performance. I was kidding. I do think cholesterol is like your an interest, like a stable metric that you're like, you always want to know that you have high or low cholesterol. It's like you always want to know if you have high or low engagement, maybe.
Right. There's some analogy in there.
And then somehow Anne and him end up on a tangent about not giving medical advice, but connecting everything back to Grey's Anatomy. The other part about the data is like you can look at it, it can tell you something, you can dig deeper, but HR people are always told, I feel like they're sick of hearing this, like tell the story of the data. And I feel like that advice is often thrown around without anyone actually explaining how to do it. I think I've written like 3 newsletters on this topic actually on how to explain how to do it. But what do you think good data storytelling looks like in practice, especially if you're dealing with like a skeptical CEO or even a CFO, which I'm like, why do I got to talk to my CFO about my data? But I do sometimes.
Yeah. I think about this too, because that's a lot of what my team does is, whether we're partnering with HR or sometimes we're delivering that directly to executive presentation. And it really is something where the first few minutes of your presentation either make it or break it. So when I think about storytelling, this doesn't work 100% of the time, but 99% of the time, I think you have to lead with your findings and why they matter and not overwhelm people with data up front. So I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new there. I think about the movie The Sixth Sense. I know for some of you, you may not have even been born. This was like in the late 90s, I think. So Bruce Willis, we went through that entire movie believing that he was helping a child that saw dead people. And at the very end, you learned that Bruce Willis's character had been dead all along. Sorry if I ruined that for anybody that was planning on watching a 30-year-old movie. Spoiler alert. You can't storytell like that with executives. You can't have your ahas at the very end. You have to really be mindful of the attention span of how much they have going on. And so it's not a negative. I don't mean to say the attention thing necessarily as a negative, just kind of knowing your audience. And so you have to lead with the takeaways, and you have to also say, like, how does this impact the business? And this is what we need to do about it. I feel like that is the story you need to tell. We don't necessarily need a big PowerPoint deck with a response rate of an engagement survey. Here's every question and how people responded. Now here it is compared to the benchmark. That's a lot of data, but it's not insights, and it's not the most the most important insights.
No, I did this practice recently where we ran a survey about our company retreat. And then I looked at the data and I kind of told myself like what would be the story I would tell about this retreat and the survey we got back. Or the data we got back. Then I actually went into ChatGPT, maybe it was Claude at the time. I can't remember which one. I've been using both far too much. I'm not happy about it. But I went in and asked it to also look at the data and tell me a story. And I was genuinely pleased with myself that it came up with the same story that I came up with. And I was like, hell yeah. I'm smarter than AI. But in all reality, like that, it helped also clarify to me that is the narrative and story I should go with. Because sometimes like we as HR, we're so close to the data that we start to put our own unconscious spin on things.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really helpful for me. And it helped me frame out like, okay, I'm going to start with these really important key findings first. And I'm going to talk about like why we're seeing them, what groups they're popping in, and what that means for us in the future. And I basically guided our whole retro call through that in a doc and like let everyone read it. And after 30 minutes, our team was like, wow, this was so helpful to look at this data. And now we know what we want to do differently in the future. And I was like, sure do. And
Yeah.
it was all writing. I think I share like maybe 6 numbers. It was like
Yeah.
key point number, where this is popping, why it matters, what we're doing about it.
Exactly. Exactly. I think, I have been in this industry for a long time, and I remember the era of PowerPoint presentations being like 70 slides.
Oh my God.
And your very last slide
I'm
was,
cringing.
here is what you should know. And it's like, oh my goodness,
No.
no, let's not do that anymore.
We are broken. Our attention span is absolutely
Exactly.
shattered. So
Yeah.
just tell them exactly what they need to know first and what you're going to do about it and
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
That's like always my take. It's interesting. We've been talking a lot about like how HR can show up for others and present the data and advocate. And we spend as HR like so much energy helping employees thrive. But I think a lot of HR people would maybe privately admit that they don't feel like they're thriving themselves. Do you by chance see that in the data?
We see that in the data, and quite frankly, we hear that every day.
Yeah.
So
Same.
we get to partner with so many HR professionals every day, and I do feel like we create that safe space for them because they are doing a lot of this work to benefit the organization, but you all are part of the organization too. And so I absolutely think that this is an issue or something that needs to be addressed. And when we think about thriving, I know that is a word that's, used by a lot of companies. We think about it as, am I feeling connected kind of to the organization I'm part of, the team that I'm part of, and the work that I do, and am I performing well? Kind of those two axes. But I think how I would break that down, and when I think about helping HR, we think about the conditions you need to be able to thrive. And there's not many of them, but they're all important. So you need to feel aligned.
Yes.
Is the work that I do aligning with what matters most to the organization and the strategy and the goals? Do I feel empowered to do the work that I'm supposed to be doing? Do I have the opportunity to grow? And do I feel valued? And where I hear HR struggle the most right now is we have a lean team. We've maybe laid off people. Our budgets are cut. I feel very strapped for what I'm able to do. And so I think that's where that aligned condition for thriving becomes so important. I mean, they're all important, but that gives you the ability to say, am I trying to do everything? Am I doing everything that I used to do just because we've always done it? Or am I focused on the most important work? And that I think then helps you simplify what you can be focused on a day-to-day. And if anybody questions you, then you're able to really make that connection to these are the top priorities of the business. And this is why I'm working on this. And then, hopefully those other conditions too. I think sometimes just being able to, talk with other people about the work that you're doing and listen to your employees. And I think when you do hear those positives, a lot of times it is because HR has had a hand in it.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, all of you are happy? Did you forget
Yeah,
that I constructed this?
You're welcome.
None of you seem to understand that is of my doing. I pulled 18,000 marionette strings to get the thing to happen that you love right now. It's so funny because one of my posts that's still pinned to my LinkedIn and went like baby viral on LinkedIn was just a post that started with, you do realize your HR person is also an employee of the company, correct? Like the things that you are feeling, we are also probably feeling. And also we're trying to control them and fix them, but maybe we're not given the authority to do that. So people forget that. But I mean, I have hope that we as HR can figure out how to thrive because we are, I think, like the energy of every organization. Like, yes, the DNA might be the founder's DNA, but I think we're the force multipliers that make everything come to life.
I think that's what makes the work that we do so exciting is helping employees, but then being able to work with HR teams and kind of hearing how we can help. So that's motivating for me.
On the note of help, if an HR leader came to you tomorrow and said, I want to completely rethink how I'm measuring and reporting engagement, where would you tell them to start?
Uh, I actually get this question from time to time, and
Really?
we do at Quantum. People love this, but my response back is why? I answer with a question, which I know people always love that, but I have to
I do
understand
the same.
why.
Yeah.
Because I want to know what is the problem that we are solving for. And so a little bit different, but what this question makes me think of is I think maybe like 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, I would hear organizations and their HR teams come to us and say, we're thinking about not doing a full engagement survey anymore. And instead, we're going to do a bunch of pulse surveys. We're going to do a quarterly pulse survey or a weekly pulse survey. And when I would ask that question, why, they would say, we're not really seeing any action. So instead, we think if we increase the frequency, then people are going to keep it top of mind and they're going to be action planning and doing all of that in between. I think to me, we're solving the wrong problem there.
Mm.
We have an action planning problem, but we're trying to solve that with survey frequency. And so whenever someone is trying to solve something new, I get really passionate about understanding the why because I want to help us solve the right problem. And I think, what I would anticipate maybe that response being these days is I need to make sure we're measuring the things that really matter. I
Mhm.
need to make sure that I have the data and the metrics I need to report to the business. So hopefully that is what we're helping solve. But yeah, I think it's not just about the specific survey questions, but what is the main objective? How does a survey like this serve the organization? Where are the gaps? What do we need to improve on? And that's where
You would
the
start.
magic happens.
Okay. Well, lots of food for thought there. I love also asking why. Or my second favorite question is like, what problem are we trying to solve? Like someone will be
Yes,
like, what if we did X, Y, and Z? And almost every time I'm like, well, what problem are we trying to solve?
exactly. If you
And
can't
if they can't,
articulate it,
then there's no problem and we don't need to solve it.
exactly. That goes back to the alignment piece for conditions to thrive. That's where HR doesn't need to spend their time.
Definitely not. That is one of my biggest pet peeves. When someone is like, let me fix this thing that is not even relevant and not even a problem. Like, are you for real right now? There's 16 other burning fires and you're over here being like, let's fix this one thing that we're not even doing every day, not the other things that we're doing every day. It really bugs me how people get work done. I need a whole ranting episode on that because I'm just like, did everyone miss the lesson on how to prioritize and understand, like, take urgency out of things? Just ask yourself, is this an impactful thing and a problem I need to solve? And if the answer is no, don't solve it.
There you go.
You just don't even need to worry about it.
Exactly.
But we make all these assumptions as HR leaders about the problems we're facing and why. And it's from the goodness of our hearts sometimes that we like have these assumptions and these things that we want to fix. But if you had to tell HR leaders to let go of an assumption when it comes to their people data, what would you tell us to let go of?
I love this question.
Hell yeah.
Where my mind goes is that you need like more data or that
Mm.
your assumption that you have this dashboard with so many numbers, so many metrics, and you maybe believe that everybody else thinks that that's valuable. And again, going back to the piece that data is very valuable, but it's a lot more valuable when it's insights and it's a lot more valuable when it connects to the business.
Mm.
Um, and so while we can be data geeks, I'm a data geek. I like to look at a lot of
Same.
numbers. I shouldn't assume that everybody else needs to see all of that data with me. And I think the more we have that mindset too, the more that our people data becomes business data.
Mm.
And HR doesn't necessarily need to own that. I know a lot of the conversations we have with HR sometimes is like, how do we get leadership buy-in? How do we get people to care? It's like,
Story of my
well,
life.
right?
Put on my
If
gravestone.
we can figure out the few things that really matter in terms of reporting for the business, those smart questions we were talking about
Mhm.
earlier, then that's how we get buy-in.
Love that. I am also a data nerd and sometimes I'm like, I need more. And
Yeah.
the next time I think about that, I'm going to think of you because I'm going to be like, I actually don't
Yes.
need more. I just need to look at what I have and like, what am I learning from what I have versus before I go and insist on collecting more.
Yes. Or connect what you have.
Yeah.
Um,
Ugh,
there
I
you go.
don't right now. And I'm really working on that. The engagement performance piece gave me a lot of food for thought because I don't connect the two. And now I really want to figure out how I can and segment the data in a way that's like way more helpful for me. Um, what I want to end on like some high notes, even though this entire
Yeah.
conversation has been high notes, actually. So thank you. What gives you hope right now where all of this is headed? The data, the conversations, the way HR is evolving? Because like before we even hit record, I was venting to you about how AI has become my life and how I can't think about anything else other than AI because that's all everyone is talking about. And it's really frustrating me because I am worried about its impact on the earth and the
Yeah.
world and the people and all the things. And so I think asking like what's giving you hope right now, maybe it'll help me combat that feeling after this because I've been struggling. It's
No
tough.
pressure.
Sorry, no pressure for you to give me all the hope I possibly need to exist in this world,
No.
please. And right now.
Yeah. Well, let me give it a try.
Okay. You're gonna do great.
I think, you know, repeating a piece I mentioned earlier, where I think a lot of organizations are thinking ahead and they are thinking about what is the development our people need?
Mm,
What is it that we need to change as a business and as a workplace to be ready for that future? I I get inspired by thinking that way and appreciate that. And I think part of that is because we are still focused on people.
mm,
There's absolutely this reality that AI is incredibly important in
yeah.
workplaces these days.
Mhm.
Organizations need to be focused on that, need to be thinking about how it impacts everything. But when we still think about what our people need and just what that experience is like as people have so much change in front of them, we are not going to slow down change. Change is not going to stop. I think employees are finally picking up on the fact that um, we shouldn't just slow down and allow the dust to settle because the
Yeah.
dust will never settle,
Yeah.
unfortunately or fortunately. But how are we investing in our people so they can do their best work? They can be prepared with us. We're taking care of them. We're allowing them to thrive. Those are the things that I get inspired about.
I love that. That settled my soul
I'm so glad to hear that.
because I am really worried
Chicken
about the
soup
future.
for the HR soul.
That's actually what we're renaming the podcast starting next week. Chicken soup for the HR soul. Could you imagine if I just read I used to read those books all
I
the time
know.
and sob
We have
uncontrollably.
several
I'm,
90s references here.
I know. Listen, okay. I loved the 90s. It was a good time before the internet existed. I remember. I
So
remember what the world was like when we
peaceful.
had dial up and you couldn't be online all the time. You had to talk to people and
There was something called caller ID on a landline,
yeah.
not on your mobile phone.
And the libraries were thriving. I really miss that. Support your local library, everybody. Okay, that's one of my key points every year. I'm like, give money to your library. You need it. Everyone needs to be able to read things and engage in critical thinking. But no, the 90s were just a simpler and better time, in my opinion. Chicken soup for the HR soul. This definitely was.
Yes.
Okay, last question of the pod. What is new for you in 2026? Like, what are you thinking differently about this year?
I am thinking a lot about how to keep up with the speed of things and how to do that in an effective way. So I know that kind of ties to what we were just talking about. But as a leader, as someone that manages people, I think sometimes we are a little bit on autopilot. So I always have a team meeting. I
Mm,
always Slack my team these certain things. It's being a little bit more intentional of, is that frequency of team meetings the right cadence for how quickly we're moving? Or does it need to be a team meeting? What should it look like? So with as fast as we're moving, how am I making sure that our operations are keeping up with that? And then the other piece I would say too is, how are we taking care of our people and how does that look differently in a time when there is so much change? We are moving so quickly. Most organizations are asking a lot of their people. And I think that allows conversations around pay, benefits, time off work to re-enter the conversation without feeling fluffy or without feeling so superficial. So yeah, long-winded answer, just really trying to make sure that I'm thinking about the modern workplace as kind of a leader and a manager and not just what I've always done.
The modern workplace is the thing that keeps me up most at night because we've been doing and adopting things for work that have existed for decades in a time that's never existed before.
Yeah.
And I could get on my soapbox about that. I'm manifesting writing a book this year. So
You could write one of those books where it's choose your own adventure. It's like, if this happens, then this happens.
Love that. That's another good 90s reference. I love a choose your own adventure, mostly because I'm an agent of chaos. So I'll always go one route and then I'll go back and read it again and go the completely other route and be like, it's like 6 books in one.
Yeah, what a value.
We need more of that. Bring back choose your own adventure. I would really love that. And this has been so fun, riddled with 90s references, which I deeply appreciate. For people looking to get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
You can look for me on LinkedIn. My name is Anne Maltese, Vice President of People Insights at Quantum Workplace. You can also find Quantum Workplace and you'll be able to find me there.
I love that. The only place we find business professionals these days is LinkedIn.
Yes.
We're all
hanging out there.
We're all hanging out there
it's
against our
another
will.
Therapeutic place.
If you have the right feed, yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. You do have to curate that.
For this, maybe next time we'll do a choose your own adventure style episode where I could write 5 different endings to one episode and we could see where we end up.
That would be so fun. I'm going to
go. I'm going to go work on that. Thank you again, Anne. This has been amazing.
Welcome.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.